Hello everyone, whoever is logged in. My name is Megha, and today I'm going to be talking to you about environmental literature. But before that, a little bit about myself. I've been working in Indian publishing, children's publishing, for more than a decade, and I also write children's books. Two of my books are A Home of Our Own, that was published by Tulika in 2018, and it's on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals reading book club's recommended list of books, and Unearthed, an environmental history of independent India, that was published by the children's imprint of Penguin last year. And that, of course, is a book that delves into our country's environmental past in the years since independence. More recently, I've joined the founding team of India's first Green Literature Festival, and I will be handling their children's segment. It's called the Green Lit Fest. So back to the topic of today's presentation, environmental literature. Now, there are lots of opinions that people hold about what is environmental literature. To some people, environmental literature is necessarily literature that somehow talks of environmental conservation. Well, that is one opinion. And another school of thought, which I personally subscribe to, is that environmental literature is limitless. And why is it limitless? Because environmental literature has been created, literature on the environment, writings on nature have existed long before conservation was a concern. So really, environmental literature then, if you really take it in the true sense of the word, is any literature that talks of nature, that makes you think as a reader of nature, that evokes natural imagery in your mind. And by virtue of doing that, it may, inspire you to think of conservation as a concern. And today's presentation is an interesting compilation of everything that could possibly be bracketed. And actually, I hate to use that word bracketed, but everything that could be included in the realm of environmental literature. Environmental literature has existed since time immemorial, right? So it's very famous in India that we've had a long tradition of living living in harmony with nature and of respecting nature. A lot of our religion is about respecting nature. And a lot of our ancient scriptures, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Upanishads, the Aranyakas, all of these and many more are testimony to the fact that we've had a relationship with nature long before we invented a term like environmental literature. And even during the medieval times, there is literature that speaks of nature. I mean, if you read the Babar Nama, Babar has written extensively about, the different topography of the land, the different geography that he witnessed when he first came to India. So a lot of and even in Jahangir's memoirs, and Jahangir's work is of special interest to me because some natural historians who've studied Jahangir's memoirs say that actually Jahangir could have been a great curator at the Natural History Museum because he seems so fascinated by nature. And a lot of his writings, a lot of his ponderings were around all the things strange and sometimes delightful that panned about in the environment surrounding him, the natural surroundings. And of course, modern literature has a lot of environmental literature in it. Here I have a picture of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, which I suppose most people in the audience today, I can't see any of you, but most of you would probably be knowing about. So what is in modern literature is when you really have a lot of necessary references to modern literature as environmental literature, but environmental literature is essentially timeless. It's a timeless tradition. Environmental literature also spans geographies. So we're here in India today, but environmental literature is being produced around the world. It's all over the world. And it's not just a Western construct. A lot of people say that environmental literature is essentially Western, but as you saw in the earlier slides, India also has a very long tradition of environmental literature. So it has existed around the world. People have had a very long-standing relationship with nature, and expression through the form of literature has almost always, in all parts of the world, involved writings on nature. In India, one of the things, actually, let me move to the next slide to talk about that in a bit more detail. Languages. So environmental literature is global, and it has also been written in global languages. Today's presentation has a lot of English. I'm almost sorry for it because there is a rich tradition of environmental literature across languages. So I have one slide to just delve into that in a little bit of detail. I'm not sure of the audience makeup today. I'm not sure of what are the languages in which you all read literature, but there is a very, very rich tradition of environmental literature in languages. And even in India, in regional languages, I have a special interest in India's contemporary environmental history. And it's very interesting when you look at all these people's movements, like Chipko or Narmada Bachao. There was a very rich body of literature that came out of these movements. And all of it was, and a large majority of it was in the local languages of those places. So, in Uttarakhand, for instance, a lot of the literature is in Garhwali. I don't read Garhwali, I read English, which is why I'm giving this presentation in English, but it's very interesting. And if there are any publishers who are listening in today, I think it's very interesting to actually, if possible, and if it's of interest, to delve into that body of regional literature, because there are really some gems to uncover there. And my limited knowledge of it is something I'm trying to work around. But really, it has been a discovery to read the way people have thought of nature in some of these languages. It spans genres, and this is a very interesting series of slides I have next. I'm going to be reading, short excerpts of text and then talking a little bit about the genre. So the first bit of text that I have is from Delia Owen's New York Times best-selling book. It was one of the biggest releases of 2018. Top-selling books in 2000, right up till 2020. Very well-known title. The morning burns so August hot. The marsh's moist breath hung the oaks and pines with fog. The palmetto patches stood unusually quiet, except for the low, slow flap of the heron's wings lifting from the lagoon. And then, Kya, only 6 at the time, heard the screen doors clap. Now, where the crawdads sing is the story of Kya, and she has been referred to as the marsh girl in this novel that is set within marshlands. And why am I bracketing this piece of fiction into environmental literature? Because Delia Owens has situated her story so strongly within, a natural landscape that even as the story unravels, you get to learn a lot about this landscape. And it's not something that surprises me because Delia Owens is actually a zoologist by training. And her book is rich with references to nature. So fiction can also be slotted into environmental literature when it evokes images of nature. And many people agree that, fiction that is able to tell a story within nature is probably one of the most effective ways of getting environmental messages across to readers without even making them aware that they're reading something which is necessarily environmental literature, because a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions around what is environmental literature. And many of them deem it as necessarily academic, which it is not. Academic is just one form of environmental literature. So the next time you read a novel, try to see if the novelist is trying to make you think of the natural setting within which he or she has set their story. Nonfiction. So here I have my own book, Unearthed: An Environmental History of Independent India. I was commissioned to write this book by Penguin a few years back. And I don't visualize myself as a novelist. I am work in progress in that genre. But I love research. And when I was asked to do this book, I was quite excited, and the research was really telling. So I'm going to read the excerpt that I've chosen from my book. And it's on the Bhopal gas tragedy, as you would probably be able to tell. At 1 a.m. on 3rd December 1984, a loud siren began to blow from the factory of the Union Carbide Company in Bhopal. A foul smell filled the air. People woke up breathless. Their eyes and skin were burning as if someone had flung chili powder on them. Many of them started vomiting. It had been nearly an hour since a deadly gas had started leaking out of the factory. Now, this is narrative nonfiction, right? So it is nonfiction that can be read by anyone who is even remotely interested in this subject. The only difference between fiction and nonfiction, as most of the audience members would already probably know, is that there is no story here. It's all based on hard research. But the telling is in a manner that people who are not looking necessarily at a story will be able to enjoy it. Poetry. And here I have a piece from one of my favorite authors, Vikram Seth, from his collection Beastly Tales from Here and There. And in this book, he has basically adapted some of the most famous animal tales from around the world into verses which are full of wit, his trademark intelligent wit. So this is the monkey, the crocodile and the monkey, which is a very famous story about the monkey who throws down mangoes, sweet, sweet mangoes, to his friend the crocodile in the river below his mango trees. And one day the crocodile, who is absolutely madly and blindly in love with his wife, is asked by his wife to actually bring the monkey's heart to her, because she says that all these mangoes are so sweet, having feasted on them for so long, maybe the monkey's heart is the sweetest thing of all. And so the crocodile decides to betray his monkey friend to appease his wife. And it's a hilarious story. And here I have a few lines from the poem that Vikram Seth has adapted it into. On the Ganga's greenest isle lived Kurup the crocodile, greeny brown with gentle grin, stubby legs and scaly skin. He would view with deep-ed eyes, prey below a certain size. Now, one of my, I know I'm not talking to children probably, but one of my intentions in actually reading out these excerpts is for you to also listen in and probably listen in to see what this reading evokes in your own mind. I hope it does evoke something, in the sense, what is the picture that it's drawing for you? And definitely between all of these different genres, they induce different reactions in people. So probably you should be watching out for those as well a little bit. Comics. So here I have Rohan Chakravarti and his first book, The Great Indian Nature Trail, that was published by WWF. Wonderful book that takes you across geographies. I know I can't really read that comic, but if you have access to the book, you can even order it on the WWF website. And it is through these comics and these very rich in visual text that he takes you through different geographies. And his work, of course, now is very famous. He's got many other books out. But comics too can fall within the realm of environmental literature. And for people who are intimidated by large bodies of text, comics can be a very light and entertaining way of reading about nature. And Rohan is one of the few people whose name almost comes up on the top of my list when I think of comics on the environment. Academic. So this is what a lot of people think environmental literature is. At least that's what I have very often come across. But as you can see, academic is just but one genre within environmental literature. I'm going to read an excerpt from Mahesh Rangarajan and K. Shivaramakrishna's book, Shifting Ground. They had edited this title. It's been published by Oxford University Press. Hunting histories invariably look at fierce carnivores like the lion or the tiger or the now extinct cheetah. The elephant, with its unique position as both wild and tame in Asian cultures, has also attracted ecological, historical, and anthropological scholarship. Yet, in horse-borne cultures of combat, few animals are considered as difficult a quarry as the wild boar. Now, this is definitely non-fiction, right? So why have I slotted it as academic? Because non-fiction is probably a broader category. Not all non-fiction books are for specialist readers, whereas here, the text is definitely for somebody who is already an informed reader and wants to know more about a subject. So that is a distinction which really depends on the discernment of the reader. So if some of you are already reading a lot of environmental literature, then maybe this book wouldn't be so hard on you. But if you're new to the subject, then maybe you'll need some extra help in understanding some of the things that are mentioned here. But having said that, it's all still quite interesting and it's all still quite valuable in giving us more insights to this land. Environmental literature spans age groups. Now, all literature spans age groups. We're talking of environmental literature here because the presentation is on environmental literature. But I want to actually really address this. Environmental literature is, as much for children as it is for adults. Yeah. So I have two sets of titles here. The Eeks series, which is about, regularly seen creepy crawlies. It's been written by Aarti Muthana Singh and Mamta Naini. You can see their pictures there. It's been published by Puffin in association with WWF. And these are series that are necessarily for children. There are interesting activities inside these books and a fun story that is unraveling as kids discover the joys of engaging with children, engaging with insects instead of, being creeped out by them. I think the intention of the book is to make the vibrant insect world come out in all its joy for children instead of, making them fear these creepy crawlies. And then obviously Cities and Canopies by the academicians Harini Nagendra and Seema Mundoli at the Azim Premji University, again published by Penguin. This is a wonderful title that takes you through trees in our city landscapes. It's an award-winning book and it's for adults. But the interesting thing is that literature really doesn't have an age, right? I mean, maybe adult literature is for a necessarily grown-up audience, but that doesn't mean that children's literature is for a necessarily young audience. If you are an adult and you enjoy children's literature, there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. I am well into my 30s. It's a vocation, but it's also my guilty pleasure of, actually, why should I call it guilty? It's one of my pleasurable pursuits to delve into the pages of a children's book with all its rich visual and easily accessible text. In fact, a few years back, I had written about this, and I remember the noted academician Ramchandra Guha had told me that, children's literature is actually a great foray into the world of in the environment for anyone who is new to it, because it's so accessible, it's easy on the eye. And he quoted the example of the poem The Elephant and the Tragopan from Vikram Seth's Beastly Tales from Here and There, the book that I had spoken of earlier, which is actually about the way these animals are reacting to a dam that is going to be constructed on their river. And he said it's such a wonderful way of introducing anyone to the idea of dams. So really then environmental literature or any literature, I have a problem with bracketing it as for adults and for children. I really think children's literature is for everyone, and not even all adult literature is necessarily for a very highbrow, intellectually advanced audience. I think a lot of it is for people who just want to understand nature in a fun way, who want to understand this world a little better. Now, the interesting bit, and I know, if I go on speaking, it might get a little boring for some of us here, but so I have videos. Can films be environmental literature? And I've thought about this, but if you see, the medium is a film, but behind that medium is a piece of a written script. So someone has thought about a script on the environment and decided to adapt it into a movie. So films can very much be part of environmental literature because someone is wanting to make you think of the environment, and they have written about it and translated those thoughts on screen. So let's watch a trailer of this movie, Karvi Hawa. It came out in 2017, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, the trailer will tell us all of that. And you think about what is it? So that was one. And now more recently, I suppose some of you might have watched this. So that was Sherni that recently started airing on Amazon Prime Video, an OTT platform. So those were slightly heavier movies. I have now a stand-up comedy set, and I spoke to this particular stand-up comedian, Vaibhav Sethia. He's done a set on waste management. And even though he's speaking about it before performing this set, he actually researched on waste and came up with this set. So again, the intention is creating literature and then putting it out in this format for people to think about. And I probably hope that some of you might end up laughing after those slightly heavy trailers. Okay, sorry. So yeah, stand-up comedy. Now, what you just saw are all the various forms of literature, but does literature have any impact? Right? Does it actually lead to any changes on the ground? So when we talk of the impact of literature, we usually quote Rachel Carson and her book Silent Spring, that is considered a very important landmark in the history of the global environmental movement. Silent Spring was published in the 1960s. Rachel Carson was a marine biologist who wrote it, and it talks about the impact of pesticides on the natural surroundings and how this has very serious health impacts on everyone, animals as well as humans. And it was for the first time that, this book, it became really popular. Lots of people read it. And not only did they read it, they also started talking about the things that this book was claiming. And so serious was the discussion and so big was the outcry against the reality that was revealed in this book that the government in the US, President Kennedy, was forced to set up a science advisory committee to look into the claims that were made by this book, because the pesticide lobby was against Rachel Carson. They called her a mad woman. Obviously, it was in their interests to, deride her, because what she was saying would have very serious impacts. But when the committee was set up and it deliberated on Carson, and or what she had written in her book was thoroughly researched, she was vindicated, and it was found that indeed these pesticides are extremely dangerous to all life forms. And eventually, one piece of literature, through all the dialogue and social action it generated, because people were so intellectually invested in it, it led to the banning of DDT. So literature can have a very important impact in society, but for that, it first needs to stir discourse, right? So we need to actively be discussing environmental literature. Now, the problem is that we discuss in all sorts of literature. Recently, there was a whole outcry around the book on the Delhi riots, and people have opinions on popular culture and other things, and especially politics and Bollywood are things that interest a lot of people in this country. But the environment and literature on the environment, for one, it's considered literature for a very niche audience, which it isn't. That is one of my intentions in today's session, which is to let people know that environmental literature is for a very large audience. And two, we don't talk as much about the environment as we ought to. We've started doing it a bit more in light of the pandemic, but the idea is that we read environmental books and we start talking about some of the things that these books say. So in Rachel Carson's book, I've put an excerpt here. She talks of chemicals. The chemicals to which life is asked to make its adjustment are no longer merely the calcium and silica and copper and all the rest of the minerals washed out of the rocks and carried in rivers to the sea. They are the synthetic creations of man's inventive mind, brewed in his laboratories and having no counterparts in nature. To adjust to these chemicals would require time on the scale that is nature's. It would require not merely the years of a man's life, but the life of generations. And even this, were it by some miracle possible, would be futile. For the new chemicals come from our laboratories in an endless stream. Almost 500 annually find their way into actual use in the United States alone, and this we're talking the 1960s. The figure is staggering, and its implications are not easily grasped. 500 new chemicals to which the bodies of men and animals are required somehow to adapt each year. Chemicals totally outside the limits of biologic experience. So you can understand the power of this writing. It makes you think of the chemicals that you are getting exposed to, right? And obviously in India, we've had people's movements as I was talking. Here I have an excerpt from the Garhwali poet, lyricist, writer, Ghanshyam Sailani's work that roused sentiment during the Chipko movement of the 1970s. I don't know whether I want to venture reading the Garhwali text. I have the transliteration here, so I'm just going to play it safe and read the English translation. It's time to be awakened, my people. Let's all unite. To protect forests from the government's evil policy, hug the tree to protect them from axes. Let's preserve the true wealth of our hills. This is again literature that roused the people. People were hugging trees, and it inspired them to do that with more zeal. So literature can arouse sentiment, and if that sentiment is if that sentiment is a sentiment that leads people to think more seriously about nature and do something about it, then that's really good. And environmental literature, this is the only way in which environmental literature will really start having some impact on the ground. So there is a lot of potential in environmental literature, but to make something out of it, we as people, as readers, need to do more about it. You need to talk about it, talk about what we've read, invest in these books, talk about these books, talk about what they're saying. Basically, encourage discourse, and discourse on the scale that it makes people think of it at the policy level, at the level of actionable solutions. So what are the gap areas in environmental literature? Gap areas. Environmental literature in India is still viewed, as I said earlier, as a very niche concern. It's seen as something which is for intellectually advanced readers, whereas it is not. So we have environment education in our schools, and a lot of young people, it is the first time they're reading about the environment in a formal capacity. Yet we don't introduce environmental literature of the likes being produced by publishers in this country into the curriculum. We have textbooks, yes, which are very good. But why not introduce environmental literature too? That gives them additional perspective. Yeah. So it's very important that when we initiate environment education into our schools, we make young people think very seriously of environmental literature. And when they produce all those little essays and all those little writings, we make them realize that they are actually producing environmental literature in their own limited capacity, but they still are. And then there is environmental literature in the languages, which needs to be mainstreamed. What are the voices from the ground really saying? In this country, English readership is just about 10%, and yet it is mainstreamed. But there is such a rich body of environmental literature in the languages that needs to be mainstreamed, and more people need to read the rousing thoughts of people from the ground writing in their language on this subject. And what are some of the efforts in this direction? So it's not all, grim. There are a lot of positive efforts being made. I have some of them here. Support for creating and publishing environmental literature. So a lot of publishers, especially NGOs, are now actively looking at producing very meaningful literature for young people on the environment. Kalpavriksh is the environmental action group based in Pune that has a fabulous program of producing award-winning literature for children on the environment. And WWF, of course, is doing a great job of supporting publishers produce meaningful environmental literature. On this slide, you can see Walk the Grasslands with Takuri that WWF brought out in collaboration with Katha. And of course, the wonderful Wild Wisdom quiz books. Now, this is a fabulous experiment, which, these books do really well because they're also tied into the Wild Wisdom quiz, which is one of the most popular initiatives by WWF. It involves school children, not just in India, but around the world. And the quiz is related to the environment. And then you have these questions coming out as the Wild Wisdom quiz book. So it's a wonderful way of tying in a book to an on the ground event, and making more people wake up to it and making more people read it and appreciate it and probably think more about the environment through this. Raising profile and reach within the education system. The thing is, these things are happening, but they're happening in a limited capacity. The Azim Premji University has a series of lectures on nature writing for children. Sekmol in Ladakh is bringing out textbooks that take from local content, which is something more environmental textbooks can do, where they make the context local. In society, there are a whole lot of initiatives. Times of India has the Evoke pages dedicated to environmental pieces. The Madras Naturalist Society runs an annual essay writing competition, which is a wonderful initiative for people interested in writing. There are a whole lot of media, magazines like Down to Earth, Current Conservation, Terra Green, online platforms like sustainabilitynext.in, news channels like WeOn, online platforms like Mugabe, that are exclusively dedicated to carrying features on this. And of course, the Green Literature Festival is a newly launched festival that is dedicated to environmental literature. I have a couple of recommendations. I'm going to quickly take you through them because I believe there's not a lot of time left. There are picture books for children. When Ali became Bajrang Bali, wonderful environmental conservation meets religion, meets a whole lot of fun. Vatsala Loves Snakes by WWF, on how reptiles can be lovable. Salim, Mamu, and Me. If you've not heard of Salim Ali and you're interested, this is a picture book, a fabulous picture book written by his niece, Zai Whitaker. Water is one of the most powerful picture books I've read on water conservation. The Poop Book that uses poop to, discuss wildlife. Walking is a way of knowing, in a Kadar forest, which takes you to a forest and makes you view it from the perspective of a tribal person living there. And then obviously books, that make you engage. Story of the Brahmaputra, it's coloring, Birds in Your Backyard and Beyond. Again, a workbook, the Eagle Nest Memory Project, that, is a collage and opens up ideas on how one can document their environmental memories, their memories with nature. Fiction, A Cloud Called Bhura, one of the first, pieces of environmental fiction, of climate fiction, written in India by Bijal Vachharajani. Year of the Weeds by Siddharth Sharma, a fabulous introduction to people's movements. Gun Island, whoever, I don't think Amitav Ghosh needs any introduction. Non-fiction, Everybody Loves a Good Drought by P. Sainath, a classic. I read it back in 2013 when I started reading more in this field. Ramchandra Guha's Environmentalism, A Global History. And of course, Janki Lennon's hilarious My Husband and Other Animals. Some of these are wonderful books. And yes, that is the end of my presentation. I know I had to race through the last few slides. So I am, I suppose you might have other favorites and I would love to know of them, but I don't know, how we should do this. So thank you very much. It's been lovely having this session with you. And I hope that whatever I was able to share were things that you enjoyed listening into. So thank you very much.